afternoon. I want to welcome you to can you hear me well in the back? To the Enforcement Committee of the Medical Board of California. Today is January 18, 2018, and the time is 12:08. I'm Dr. Felix Yip, Chair of the committee. I would like to ask all of us to please turn off or turn down your cell phone to silent. You may notice committee members accessing their laptop during the meeting. They are using the laptop to access the committee meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official business meeting of the Medical Board of California, and as such, disruption of the committee's business will not be tolerated. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment, and we will be asking for public comment on each agenda item. I ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct the committee's business. Should anyone disrupt the meeting, I would ask the person to conduct him or herself in such a manner that permits the committee to transact its business. The committee welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the committee's intent to ask for public comments prior to the committee taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask for public comment on the agenda item and you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand or come forward and you'll be recognized. I would also like to request all speakers complete a presenter slip so I can call you by name at the appropriate time and the record of this meeting can be full and complete. However, this is voluntary. Please give the speaker slips to Ms. Mary Kay Cruz-Jones over there. Ms. Cruz-Jones, identify, thank you. This meeting will be available via telephone conference. Individuals listening to the meeting will have an opportunity to provide public comment and will be assisted by a moderator who will be facilitating the teleconferencing process. For those members of the public participating via teleconference, please wait until the moderator has introduced you before you make your comments. To request to make a comment during the public comment period, press *1. You will hear a tone indicating you are in the queue for comment. If you change your mind and do not want to make a comment, press *2. Please remember to mute the volume on your screen to avoid feedback. Assistance available throughout the teleconference meeting. To request a specialist, press *0. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes per agenda item. However, during agenda item 2, public comment on items not on the agenda, the committee has limited the public comment period for individuals on the teleconference and those present here today to 20 minutes. Therefore, after 20 minutes, no further comments will be accepted. During public comment on any other agenda item, 10 minutes will be allowed for comments from individuals on the teleconference line and those in audience. After 10 minutes, no further comments will be accepted. Staff from the Board's Business Service Office will be assisting me with receiving the public comment via teleconference during this meeting. I would also like to remind all speakers to please stay on topic and keep your comment to 3 minutes or less. I would like to call this meeting to order and have Ms. Cruz-Jones please call the roll.
Dr. Bolott? Here. Dr. Levine? Dr. Lewis?
Present.
Ms. Wright? Dr. Yip?
Here. Thank you. Quorum is present and would like to remind the members that we will be taking a roll call vote on all action items. Moving to agenda item number 2, public comments on items not on the agenda. I don't think I have any speaker slips. Are there any comments on the phone?
Yes, we do have a question from Eric Andrus. Go ahead. Eric Andrus, your line is open.
Part of the problem with your enforcement program is that you're patting yourselves on the back for doing very little. With upwards of 10,000 patient complaints coming in and you only handing down discipline to around 400 doctors, you do realize that's only about 4%. Do you really think that's a good track record, or are you just trying to make lemonade out of all these lemons you're handing out? To make matters worse, when you protect a doctor over patient safety, the public has no recourse to appeal your decision, so you're basically getting away with murder in many cases. When we try to hold you accountable with Public Record Act requests, you hide behind exemptions that aren't even mandatory, and your staff attorney doesn't even follow the laws and flat out breaks them. You all are not above the law. You shouldn't be striving to hide your actions from the public. It is against the law and does not further your mission statement of truly protecting consumers. Also, you're not using public reprimands for what they are intended for, minor offenses where a patient isn't harmed or killed. You need to stop bartering down harm and death cases, accusations, so that you can instead coddle the doctors with a public reprimand. Patients are being harmed and killed by doctors, and this board far too often chooses to just slap them on the wrist instead of truly holding them accountable. We will be illustrating this in more detail tomorrow during Carrie's presentation. I can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you. So noted. Any other comments on the phone? Okay, so we move for item number 3, approval minutes from the July 27, 2017 minutes.
Second.
Are there any public comments from those in the audience? Any comments from those on the phone?
Mia, any comments on the line?
No comments from the phone.
Ms. Cruz Jones, please take the roll.
Dr. Bolat? Here. Dr. Lewis? Here. Ms. Wright? Dr. Yip?
Yes. We'll now move on to agenda item 4. Ms. Dell will provide an enforcement program update.
Good afternoon, board members. I just have a brief update to provide to you today. So I'm going to provide some information on the enforcement statistics, and the data that I'm showing you is regarding physician and surgeon data only. There's no allied health licensee data in these statistics that I'm providing you. So as you can see from the statistics, we have more complaints that have come into the board in the last fiscal year, 9,619 from previous years. And of those complaints, you can also see that our complaint investigation office, that even though their workload has gone down, they are still receiving enough complaints to keep, on average from previous years. The HKU investigations open are staying steady, roughly around 1,100, and discipline taken is 466 cases in the fiscal year of 16-17. And I just want to note that even though the discipline of the 466, it doesn't correlate to the actual complaints, because those discipline could be from prior years. So a complaint that came in, say in 15-16, could have discipline that carried over into the next fiscal year. As far as revocations and surrenders, you can see that that's gone up some in year 15-16 from prior fiscal years. And also probation now has about almost roughly 200 people that are on probation. So that's a significant increase. And we are going to be looking at in this year doing a budget change proposal probably to get more positions, because we realize there's more people on probation that need to be monitored. And also the public reprimands, the statistics show that it has gone down in the last fiscal year, so more discipline has been taken other than issuing public reprimands. As far as enforcement timeframes, the average days to complete or initiate a complaint is 8 days within the second quarter of 17-18, and that's within the mandate to open a complaint within 10 days. Currently, the average days to process a complaint is 90 days in the central complaint unit, and that's a great improvement from fiscal year 16-17, which I believe was around 140 days, and in 15-16 it was 160 days. So that's a significant improvement. And I want to give a shout out to staff for all their hard work, and the managers as well. Average days to complete an investigation in the complaint investigation office, that is currently at 303 days. Excuse me, it is an increase, but it's because we've had one special investigator who from time to time has been out on extended leaves, and that special investigator also has has left the has left the board, so now we have that vacancy. And one of our other special investigators has reduced their hours and is now working part-time, but we have filled that part-time position and we are actively recruiting to fill behind the special investigator that has left. Of another comment is that the average caseload for a special investigator in the complaint investigation office is roughly at 54 cases. The average days to complete investigations in the health quality investigation unit, you can see that that has gone up compared to higher previous years. Deputy Chief Nichols will provide an update regarding the staffing of HKU tomorrow in addressing this timeframe. Average days to file formal charges, this has improved, so that has shown some improvement and we're happy to see that result. Average days from post-accusation petitions revoked statement of issues to the final decision, board decision, compared to last year's time frame, this is also lower. So that wraps up some of our enforcement statistics. Now I want to update you on the efforts of the board to improve its process regarding the receipt of peer review reports, also known as the 805 and 80501 mandated reports that come in from peer review entities. So Business and Professions Code Section 2220 subsection A requires the board to investigate the circumstances underlying Business and Professions Code Section 805 or 805.01 reports within 30 days to determine if an interim suspension order should be issued. So starting back in September 1 of 2015, we started to track the number of 805s that were coming into the board to determine within 30 days if it would warrant and turn into a potential for an ISO. And since September, we've had 234 peer review reports that were submitted. 195 within 30 days were determined that no ISO is warranted. 39 were identified within the 30 days as a possible interim suspension order. And of those 39, there are 28 complaints that are still open. 8 of them were referred to the Attorney General's office to pursue an interim suspension order, and 3 of the 39 possible reports that came in got closed with no ISO issued. In addition to ensuring that we're complying with the section of the law, we've also enhanced this 805 process by creating an educational letter that is now sent to the entities that submit the 805 reports. This letter was drafted and it was implemented in April of 2017. And what it basically is the letters are sent to facilities requiring them, if when they submitted the report, if it was incomplete or it lacked detailed information, we now send them an educational letter asking them to complete a new report within 5 days. And this has been very successful. I get lots of phone calls from the entities wanting to understand the law more about what the reports are lacking. So it's a great improvement going forward because they're providing more detail. In addition to the educational letter, we also started at the board level preparing subpoenas requesting documents regarding the reports that are coming in. The field at HKIU initially would get the peer review report and the subpoena would be prepared by the investigators. But to help streamline the investigative process, now staff at the board prepares the subpoena from the onset of getting the mandated report. And by doing this, staff drafts the subpoena within 1 to 2 business days. The subpoenas are reviewed by a Deputy Attorney General within 1 to 3 business days. So a subpoena is served on the entity within 5 to 7 business days to obtain all the records that are needed for the investigators to investigate the circumstances that led to discipline of the licensee on this peer review report. So that's a great improvement to the case aging of the investigative process. Recently also we have created some Breeze activity codes to also track cases where there's the possible ISO when the field responds back saying that yes, this could be an ISO within the 30-day time frame. Now we have the ability to track those cases throughout the investigative process and be able to conduct further follow-up. So within this 805 enhancement beginning April 24th of 2017, 61 subpoenas have been prepared by board staff, and 22 educational letters have been drafted and sent to entities that report the mandated provide the mandated report, advising them that it lacks sufficient information and was not compliant with the law. In addition, which I did not put on the slide, of the peer review reports that are coming in, those that are late, because they have 15 days by law to submit the report, a total of 10 cases are being reviewed for prosecution of notice of violation of imposition of fine for submitting a late 805 report. And the AG's office is looking at those cases, and 3 of them have been identified to pursue for civil penalties. So that whole collaboration with the Attorney General's office has been working really well, and I think this is a great improvement to the enforcement process. As far as the expert reviewer program, we have training already established for this year. On September 22nd, 2018, training will be held at USC's medical school. We are also looking at a tentative date, hopefully with San Diego's UC San Diego, and we're going to do it in conjunction, hopefully, with the October board meeting. And we're currently looking at sites to actively pursue getting it early in September or October for a location in Sacramento. As far as recruitment for the expert reviewer program, we have developed the new brochure for midwives, and all of you were provided a copy. And we worked with the Department of Consumer Affairs Public and Design unit, and we've drafted this similar brochure for midwives, just like our expert reviewer program. And we had attended a recruitment at the Midwife Alliance of North America conference to recruit more midwives, and we passed out this brochure that was created. In addition, staff attended recruitment at the Los Angeles Academy of Family Physicians chapter meeting to encourage more physicians to become expert reviewers. They're going to be looking at other conferences throughout this calendar year and attending other recruitment efforts. As far as recruiting experts into the program, the number of new experts that were recruited from July 1 through December 31, 2017, there's been a total of 37 new experts. And speaking of analytics, we were able to provide that those experts became members of our program through seeing advertisements in our website. There were 30 people that saw our advertisement. 3 were through word of mouth through our current experts or medical consultants. 1 was encouraged to apply through a medical society, board staff, and doing presentations, and enlisted 2 people to join. And also our expert training advertisement also enticed 1 per individual to become an expert. And out of the 37, 4 of those experts are in our advertised specialties. So we have now a pain management, hair restoration surgery, pathologist, and psychiatrists that are now new experts into our program. And that's my update, unless you have any questions.
Thanks, Chief. Any question, comments from the member? Dr. Lewis?
I have 3. I'm trying to remember them backwards. You said that you have the expert reviewer program site selected for the future. Is that correct?
We have USC is good to go. We're tentatively trying to get an okay from UC San Diego, and in Sacramento we're looking to actually hold it at our own hearing room.
Okay. So would you please let board members know when you have these set?
Okay.
Some of us live close by or might be off that day. If you could get some list out, because we were going to do that and I didn't see anything published.
Actually, I think she did. Dr. Bola went twice. I went once. So, but we definitely would put on and probably send an email to
Yeah,
remind.
we'll ensure we send it directly to the personal emails. I can't say how it got. If it went to personal emails or just published on the website.
Okay. Secondly, the rate is still the same. The hourly rate?
It is.
Low. Okay. Just keeping it, we haven't changed that. Now, going back to a different topic, it's nice, we can sit up here and we can give you all the niceties and pie in the sky and what we want. Basically, you have to do the work. And I really need you to be honest, and everybody to be honest, whether you can fulfill what the board is asking you to do. And if you can't, you just have to say, this year ain't gonna make it. It may be next year. And don't feel you have to say yes to everything. Because sometimes I hear in our, strategic planning, all these things that would be nice. I'm thinking, you were losing staff. So it's a comment to make.
I'm not sure what specific.
I don't want to say it again. So
That's okay.
I can answer for you. I think doctor is thinking you're doing what you can, but you're limited resources. Sometimes you just tell us that you don't think you can achieve that. But I can answer for I was going to say later that I attend one of the meeting with 3 party, which I will mention later. They actually try to do whatever they can to say yes to accomplish that. So at least they try. So
try, and they say yes.
they're very hard too. So
Yeah, but you can also say no. I mean, really, right?
yes.
You can say no.
Are there any questions, comments from the board member, Dr. Pola?
Yeah, thank you very much. Wanted to go back, we talked about it in strategic planning, but those 10,000, little south of 10,000, if those can be somehow categorized in the action, I think that that would be very helpful. I know that's going to take resources, but it's something that it's got to not be a manual process, because that will just be an exercise of futility. That to be able to categorize these, and really as if I were a healthcare consumer and I were to call the medical board, the question is, what is it that we can do and can't do? That there's a process, and we talked about it earlier about health systems, and that kind of goes back to your 805s. What is it that the health systems are responsible for, and what they're doing about some of these issues? So I do raise that. And as far as the 805s, do we, of those 234 or so, are we able to categorize those from coming from acute care hospitals, from post-acute, from SNFs, not to name them, but to categorize them, to see where our challenges are? And that would be then, I think, the responsibility of the medical board to be able to identify the frequency with which a system or hospital is having some challenges.
Right. The end report does categorize. So specifically for the 805 and 80501 reports, the last annual report showed there was a total of 91 805 reports and 8 805.01 that came within the annual report time frame. And it does break it down, and it says that 60 were submitted by healthcare facility centers, nothing from a surgical center, 19 from healthcare service plans, and 12 from medical group employers. So in the annual report, it does break that down, and I also believe the complaints are broken down. Where's that? This one right here, right? So it is, that's not page 6 of the annual report. It talks about 91 for fraud coming from a public entity, 156 regarding health and safety issues from a public complaint. And so it does break it down in the annual report as far as categorizing. And that's on page 6 of the annual report.
I think what we were talking about during the strategic plan is the timelines for each of those different ones.
Right.
But we do have where they come from and what that complaint was regarding. So you can definitely see the breakdown. Obviously, the biggest group is gross negligence and incompetence that we receive complaints for. That's our biggest one, and then followed by unprofessional conduct, which is a lump together. So we can identify where we received them. We've just never looked at them individually for timelines as to
I see.
what type of complaint takes the longest. We actually, you'll remember, I think it was in the July board meeting, we showed those heat maps with the
Yes.
complaints and the types. So maybe that's something we can go back and do, is not a heat map of the state, because I don't think you were quite asking for that, but breaking it down by case type within those time frames of what what we're reporting to you. So I think that's something that Ms. Delp and I can go back with our IT unit and work on.
And not to take away from what I think Dr. Lewis mentioned, the need to move these cases. So retrospective work takes time as well. So I don't want to put that additional burden because we need to be able to move forward. But to move forward, sometimes one, as you well know, look back to say, where are we, where are our hot spots and what are we doing? And that will also help us guide us in our education as we talk to our trainees and those that are practicing physicians. So thank you.
And just so you know, too, the disciplinary actions as well are broken down by type. So the good thing about resources on statistics when you ask them for us for them is that doesn't stop Ms. Delp from doing her work and her staff's work because our IT unit runs those statistics. So just to Dr. Lewis's point, as far as statistics when you ask for them, and they have a limited bandwidth too, but it's usually not something that's going to impact our processing cases.
And the final comment is what from that data rich, information poor, is what is the action and what are the actionable items that are moving the group forward. So thank you.
Thanks. Are there any public comments from those in the audience?
Yes,
Any
we do
comments
have a question from the phones. Marion Hollingsworth, you may go ahead.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Marion Hollingsworth, and I have two questions for you. First, I'd like to ask why the number of investigations is actually down by almost 200 in the last fiscal year from the previous one. And this is despite the fact that complaints increased by almost 1,000. The medical board only investigated 15% of the complaints it received in the past year, according to your numbers. Why is this? The previous year was 19%, which was bad enough. My second question is who decides whether a complaint goes to an investigation? Is this person who decides a doctor or have any medical training? It seems that a reviewing doctor is not brought in until a case goes to an investigation. So if you could answer those two questions, I would appreciate it, and I would also be willing to repeat them if you need it. Thank you.
Thanks.
So as far as I believe the question was the number of investigations down that have been referred to the health quality investigation unit have gone down when the complaints have gone up. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
So it is in the B&P code, and I can't remember the exact one. I think it's 2220, excuse me, I believe. And that is where it explains that our investigations are looked by a medical consultant up front, and that's through the central complaint unit process. So if a medical consultant in the same specialty as the subject physician has determined that the case does not require a referral to the field, then the case gets closed. So that is probably the scenario that has happened, even though the number of complaints have risen, that the medical consultant looking at the facts of the case and they take into consideration the complaint materials, the medical records, any other relevant information that has been gathered, and they make an upfront determination, and that's in the statute, and that's part of the enforcement process. So that's probably why then to say the number has gone up, but the referrals have not been consistent with the number, if that's what you're saying. As far as who decides, again, it's the medical consultant. The medical consultant is the one that makes the referral to the field saying this requires more investigation after them looking at the materials of the investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no further comment. Now move on.
We do have another question.
Any comments on the phone?
Go ahead.
Eric Andrus, you may go ahead.
So let me get this straight. There's one person who decides whether a case goes to investigation. They single-handedly decide whether these cases are going to go on to an investigation. What if that person is wrong? On legal lawsuits, there's often 3, 4, 5, 6 different medical experts, and they don't always agree. You're relying on one person We don't even know the qualifications of that person, and when a member of the public inquires to find out who this person is and if they're qualified to even work on the case, you guys hide behind your public record exemptions, and nobody can even find out if they're qualified. What if that expert is wrong, and they're sending investigations to be closed? There's something very sadly wrong with your system.
Again, I don't know if was a comment. It wasn't really a question, but again, the medical experts they are screened as far as qualifications. They don't have any complaint history. They have to have the same education and training as the subject physician. They have to, when they're given the case, they're asked to look at the circumstance of the case and do you have experience within, say, a procedure that happened during that time frame of when it occurred. So they are screened, and we do presently require a physician, according to the law, to look at the case up front.
Any other comment? Okay, great.
No further comments on the phone.
Thank you. Now let's move on.
I apologize. Eric Andrus has re-queued up. Sir, you may go ahead.
That doesn't really answer the question, Ms. Delp. Just because they're qualified doesn't mean that they are correct when they make the decision to close a complaint. As I said, on legal lawsuits, there's often upwards of 6 experts that disagree with each other on the facts of a case. You're relying on one expert, and there's no recourse, there's no accountability for the public to question whether that person was right, because they're single-handedly closing complaints. There is no accountability. It should go to at least a minimum of 3 experts, and you should take the 2 out of 3. Why would you allow one person who could end up being wrong close complaints? That is probably why your complaint numbers are 4%. You have too many cases that are being closed that are legitimate. Tomorrow we're going to talk about cases where people have lost all 4 arms and legs, and you've closed their complaints. We have cases of death where you have closed their complaints. These experts are wrong, and there's no accountability, and there's no appeal process for the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we move on to agenda item 5, and I'll provide the members with an update on the January enforcement collaboration meetings that was held on January 8, 2018 up in the main office in Sacramento. So those attendants were myself, Executive Director Chris Meyer, Deputy Director Ms. Lally, Enforcement Chief Ms. Delp, Enforcement Program Managers Ms. Houston, Ms. Romero, and Chief Crease, and Deputy Chief Nichols, Senior Assistant Attorney General Ms. Castro, and Supervising Deputy Attorney General Ms. Davis. So discussion was held on various enforcement topics, including the ongoing investigation regarding medical exemptions, vaccinations, and licensed practice medicine and over-prescribing cases. Processing issues also discussed regarding investigation that are approaching the statute of limitation, evidentiary issues concerning investigation, and revisit of the current policies regarding parallel proceedings. The attendees worked together, and a consensus was reached on all issues. And lastly, enforcement statistics were discussed, and Ms. Delp stated in her presentation today, the complete investigation process from complaint receipt to disciplinary action has gone down by 54 days from 1,034 days to now 980 days, and there's improvement, even though we still have room for improvement. The investigation team's working relationships cooperative, united, and in providing the best consumer protection possible. As I said earlier, with the limited resources they have, there are a lot of yes they would say, but of course they certainly try very hard to achieve that yes. So thank you. The meeting are held twice a year, so the next update will provide either July, October enforcement committee meeting. Any questions or comments from the members? Any public comments from those in the audience? Any comments from those on the phone?
comments on the line?
No comments from the line.
Thank you.
Okay, moving to agenda item number 6, Ms. Hecklin and Mr. Davis from the Attorney General Office will now give a presentation on the Health Quality Investigation Unit process, including vertical enforcement process.
How MBC investigations are conducted pursuant to the 2015 Vertical Enforcement and Prosecution Protocol. Vertical enforcement has been in vogue, for lack of a better term. It's been the law since 2005. A new protocol came out in 2015, and that will be the focus of this presentation. The vertical enforcement team is comprised of the executive director and chief of enforcement of the medical board. They have ultimate say on the direction of the investigation and the disposition of the investigation. Other team members include HQIU investigators, supervisors, commanders, and the deputy chief. HQE deputy attorneys general, including a primary deputy attorney general who's assigned at the beginning of the investigation, a lead prosecutor, a supervising deputy attorney general, excuse me, and a senior assistant attorney general. Lead prosecutors are liaisons that are housed in HQIU field offices. They serve as on-site legal counsel, participate in case reviews that are conducted at the field office on a quarterly basis. They consult with the DAGs, the primary DAGs that are assigned to the case, and investigators regarding the direction of evidence collection and whether there's need for immediate action in a given investigation. Cases are assigned within the Health Quality Enforcement section based on DAG rank. For example, we have 4 different DAG ranks. There's DAG, DAG 3, DAG 4, and DAG 5. DAG 5s are the most senior and most experienced. The investigations are assigned based on experience. So if a real complex overprescribing case comes in, for example, we endeavor to assign that to a DAG 5. HQE has 5 offices. We're staffed by 7 supervising deputy attorney generals, 52 line DAGs. The average caseloads of the line DAGs include 30 to 40 medical board investigations, 15 to 20 administrative actions, and assorted other legal work, including Penal Code Section 23 appearances, writs in Superior Court, and even cases that go to the Court of Appeal. DAGs also maintain a caseload of investigations and prosecutions for other DCA boards. And I will hand it off to my partner here.
Good afternoon. The Health Quality Investigation Unit currently has 13 field offices located throughout the state. We have 77 sworn investigator positions, 25 medical consultants, and we have 18 management positions consisting of supervisors, commanders, and a deputy chief. One of the reasons we have the offices located throughout the state is to comply with the 75-mile requirement when we serve a subpoena on a party to produce records or to appear for a testimony. The caseloads for the investigators, some of them have up to 40 or more, where our ideal caseload would be between 15 and 18. This slide depicts the team members. The investigator must identify, locate, and contact complainants, witnesses, and patients. They must identify what evidence is needed and how to get it. They must identify additional patients and locate them. They identify what leads to pursue and what information may be out there to help the case. For example, collecting video recordings, police records, prescription logs, calendars, depositions, or other statements. They also conduct their own surveillance and do undercovers. They collect email, phone, and text records. They collect bank records, corporate documents, credentialing files, protocols, and formularies. And to collect all this information, subpoenas are often necessary, which are a time-consuming component of any investigation. They also coordinate the review of the entire case by a medical consultant in their office. They coordinate the physician interview, and they coordinate the expert review. The next member of the team is the medical consultant. This slide identifies the key role that the medical consultants in the field office have in the entire investigation process. But they also play a pivotal role in identifying additional medical issues that may not have been addressed in the initial consumer complaint or during the initial review by the expert for the central complaint unit. They also assist by identifying additional patients, especially in those cases of overprescribing, by carefully reviewing the entire cures report. And they play a critical role in assisting the team with identifying and selecting the appropriate expert to review the case.
The Deputy Attorney General involved in the investigation renders legal advice, directs the acquisition of evidence, determines the legal sufficiency of that evidence, drafts and proposes accusations for filing after the investigation is complete, and ultimately prosecutes the administrative case. The DAG also engages in other interim legal work that I'll talk about in a later slide, but those include emergency actions like interim suspension orders, Penal Code 23 appearances, and also subpoena enforcement in order to facilitate acquisition of medical records. And as Mr. Hegline pointed out, the MCs are a critical part of this team. We need their expertise to review medical records and really identify other issues that may come up in a given investigation. It's also incumbent on the DAG, if the medical consultant identifies other issues, that they calculate the statute of limitation as to those other issues in addition to the statute as to the original patient or complainant.
Cooperation, consultation, and communication are the paramount components of the VE model, where everyone must get along in order for the model to work to the benefit of public protection. The investigators regularly communicate with a variety of assigned deputies on the status of their mutual investigations. To facilitate movement on all cases, every quarter we hold case reviews where every investigation is reviewed and discussed with the lead prosecutor. During these meetings, roadblocks are discussed and strategies are developed for keeping cases progressing. For the oldest cases on a caseload, more frequent updates are held and strategies are modified to ensure these cases progress timely and within statute. Lead prosecutors are expected to be in their assigned field office at least once a week, and while there, they are to review new cases that have come in, cases going out to expert for review, and they discuss strategy, especially for the oldest or most complex cases, and provide legal advice. Everyone performs their assigned function. The sworn investigative work and the practice of law are not shared. Each participant brings their expertise to benefit the client's ultimate mission of public protection. Finally, in the spirit of facilitating the 3 C's to resolve procedural or legal issues, the Senior Assistant Attorney General, Deputy Chief of the Health Quality Investigation Unit, and MBC executive staff have regular meetings to address and resolve procedural questions that arise.
The AG's office collaborates with investigators on behalf of the medical board as part of their investigative function. The Attorney General's office identifies and directs the acquisition of testimonial and physical evidence in order to permit the AG's office to properly advise the executive director of the medical board on legal matters, including whether to file an accusation, whether a complaint should be dismissed for lack of evidence. And this prism through which we make these analyses is the burden of proof in your administrative cases, which is clear and convincing evidence beyond a reasonable certainty, or to a reasonable certainty. They also advise on interim actions that I talked about before, interim suspension orders, PC 23 actions, and other matters. They also may recommend a citation be issued to a physician or a pre-accusation reprimand. They work closely with the investigators to develop and modify the investigation plan as the investigation proceeds, and other facts emerge that may warrant, again, recalculation of the statute of limitations. They determine when and how to participate in physician interviews. They review and approve subpoenas for production of records, subpoenas for attendance at physician interview. They vet potential expert reviewers in each case to make sure that we're getting a qualified expert and the best expert to review a given case, and they ultimately evaluate the expert opinions. Your cases are, in my opinion, some of the most complex in the Department of Consumer Affairs. There are voluminous medical records. There are complex medical issues that need to be addressed, rectified, and investigated. And there is also vigorous defense in these cases. Your licensees hire fantastic defense attorneys, and they are vigorous in their defense of these cases. And all those play into the collaboration between the investigator and the DAG and how to deal with defense attorneys. Public protection is always the primary goal of this collaboration and ultimately the investigation.
Disagreements and conflicts do arise, but they generally arise in two areas. During the investigation with respect to the acquisition of evidence and at the conclusion of the investigation when a disposition needs to be decided upon. Fortunately, since the disposition process was changed on July 1st, 2017, there haven't been any situations where there are disagreements or conflicts rising to the Medical Board of California. There are still, however, concerns that arise that usually revolving around the volume of cases, the scant resources that are available, mutual concerns with cases nearing the statute of limitations, and whether there is enough evidence at the conclusion of the investigation to make a decision on an appropriate disposition. Nevertheless, people with both agencies do the best they can to resolve issues as they arise and get supervisors and managers involved early on to keep conflicts from rising to the board. Supervisors and managers with both agencies work very hard to avoid conflicts and create positive working relationships by resolving conflicts at the lowest level. This is because the staff with both agencies have a passion for public protection. Finally, the Senior Assistant Attorney General and the Deputy Chief of HQIU meet monthly to discuss and resolve any issues that may have arisen so that they can be dealt with. The investigation. The central The Central Complaint Unit determines which field office to send the case to based on the physician's address of record. However, other factors may come into play, such as whether there is a current or previous case in a different office on that same physician, or whether it's known that the physician is practicing in another office's area. Sometimes we know that a physician has moved and has not updated their address of record. Once the case arrives in the field office, it is uploaded to the cloud. The supervisor reviews the case to verify it's in the correct office and that it should remain there. They also look at whether the case should be handled on an urgent or priority basis. Some cases are better suited for another field office based on staffing, or that another office had a previous case, or for another office entirely, such as the Medical Board's Complaint Investigation Office, the HQIU Non-Sworn Unit, or the Division of Investigations Investigation and Enforcement Unit, or whether it should be returned to the Complaint Unit for additional workup. Once it is determined that the case is remaining in the field office, the supervisor, again, analyzes the case to make sure to prioritize the case and determine its urgency, and then to which investigator to assign the case based on many factors. And these factors are whether there is a current or previous case on that same physician, each investigator's current total caseload, their caseload complexity and case type. For example, how many multi-patient overprescribing cases they have, how many sexual misconduct cases they have, how many impairment cases they have, or how many complex 805 cases they have. Finally, the supervisors also must consider each investigator's experience, or where the physician is located, since some offices cover a large geographic area in California. It may be more advantageous to have one investigator handle multiple cases in a distant area of the state.
As part of the review, when a case comes in, the supervising investigator, lead prosecutor, and primary DAG initially identify whether the case warrants urgent or imminent action. And that can include, as I stated before, bail recommendations in a criminal case pursuant to Penal Code Section 23. It could include petitioning for a mental or physical examination pursuant to Business and Professions Code 820, or seeking an interim suspension order before the Office of Administrative Hearings. In identifying potential for harm, seasoned investigators, DAGs, and medical consultants rely on their training and experience to make these calls regarding whether we need to go down the track and make a priority of this case and gather evidence in order to obtain interim relief. This is one of the most important parts of VE in terms of public protection. If the case isn't identified as urgent, well, if it is identified as urgent, it's expected that it goes to the top of everybody's to-do list. If it's not identified as urgent, it proceeds pursuant to the protocol, which involves the investigator providing an initial plan for investigation, which is called an IPPR. That plan is amended and updated as the case progresses, and the material is shared on a cloud-based sharing system. So the primary, the lead, the chief of enforcement, and the investigator have access to that and can keep up with the case as it develops and changes over time. After the review, the investigation proceeds into the evidence collection portion. The evidence collected in a case includes interviewing the complainant, interviewing the patient, interviewing other witnesses to the events alleged in the complaint, including nurses, the patient's family, other doctors, subsequent treaters. And Andrew, pick up where I left.
During the course of every investigation, it is imperative that the investigators evaluating each case and asking themselves what information may be available to help with that case, including evaluating whether they should do surveillance, an unannounced visit, an undercover phone call, or an undercover visit in addition to getting the medical records. Surveillance can be very useful in prescribing and impairment cases to be able to describe the office environment and the clientele and gather valuable information about patients and the physician. Undercover phone calls may be used to elicit information in sexual misconduct cases. Undercover visits may be useful for prescribing sexual misconduct in general office conduct cases, including allegations of unlicensed practice. In all of these situations, it is imperative that the investigator is able to articulate their observations in a report so that an independent reader is able to paint a mental picture. What is most important to understand is how much planning and preparation goes into each one of these activities, because like first impressions, we only get one chance. The planning of an undercover operation and assembling enough staff can take weeks. It requires surveillance and just a large amount of preparation. Of course, getting the certified medical records from the physician is always paramount if the patient will not cooperate by signing a release. We initiate the process to serve a subpoena for the records if warranted. This involves making a good faith effort to contact the patient for a release, having the entire matter reviewed by a medical professional, and having the subpoena approved by the deputy and the commander. This is another activity that takes a significant amount of time and must be weighed against whether or not it's worth it based on the information you have if your patient is not cooperating. The next part of this is it's always important. Sorry, it's you.
In the event that during the attempt to acquire patient records in a case that we get either no release or a non-response in response to our subpoena, we may have to go to subpoena enforcement. Throughout the process, both HQE and HQIU are the guardians of patient privacy. We maintain patient privacy as if it were our own. In the event we have to go to subpoena enforcement, we enter into the world of civil litigation in a way, and it may stall a meritorious investigation. We're now at the mercy of the Superior Court's calendar, and this sometimes causes a delay. However, in many of our cases that involve standard of care allegations, without medical records, we have no case. That is the evidence that is ultimately reviewed by our expert reviewer, and without it, we can't go forward. We've been very successful over the years and recently in obtaining appellate court decisions allowing us easier access to obtain these records in the interest of public protection. Again, we protect patient privacy at the investigation stage through the administrative stage by sealing these records using nondescript alphabetical letters to identify patients, and it is something that occurs not frequently, but often enough that it becomes an issue in certain cases and may extend the timeline to investigate a case.
It's important that investigators remain on their toes, evaluating what information and evidence may be available for the investigation. Investigators are always interacting with people and reviewing documents, and during these interactions, must be listening and looking for clues as to what tangible evidence there may be to help with the case. This is especially important in impairment and sexual misconduct cases, where the investigator must build a rapport with the victim. But all cases require a high level of concentration so nothing is missed. With all these cases, the actual process to obtain evidence may take weeks for each item of evidence. For example, one facility would have 30 days to produce medical records, and with the prescribing cases, only sworn investigators may take possession of the original prescriptions from a pharmacy. And with the increasing number of multiple patient cases with multiple pharmacies, there are many pharmacies that have to be visited to retrieve the original prescriptions and to interview the pharmacist. Then the prescriptions must be analyzed by the investigator to determine whether or not they were forged or altered. Finally, the prescription information is evaluated to capture the total volume of medications being prescribed to each patient. For alleged drug or alcohol impairment cases, the investigator collects the physician's biological fluids or hair samples to determine whether or not the physician is safe to practice, or whether there is sufficient evidence to pursue an administrative action such as a petition to compel an exam or file an accusation. In addition to collecting evidence from the physician directly, they also build their case by locating and interviewing multiple witnesses, getting declarations if necessary, conducting surveillance and undercover operations to obtain the objective evidence, and having the information reviewed by a medical professional, which, as I said, requires time-consuming planning and preparation. Of course, there is always the potential that every case involves more than one issue. So the investigators must consider all of these things during the course of any investigation and pursue all leads, since any one case may have multiple issues such as quality of care, plus mental or physical illness, plus drug or alcohol issues, or a criminal history.
The physician interview is a critical portion of the investigation, and it's the physician's opportunity to tell their side of the story. It's also a critical evidence gathering opportunity for the investigator and the DAG. Sometimes the story that's told by the physician at the interview warrants a closure of the case. They explain things. Other times they make admissions which make our case stronger. Ultimately, it's very important to get their story because that recording and transcript ultimately goes to our expert evaluator who analyzes it. The participants in the subject or the physician interview are the investigator, the medical consultant, the primary DAG, or the lead prosecutor, the physician, and the physician's attorney. The physician can apprise himself of the general nature of the complaint against him by requesting a Business and Professions Code 800C letter from the medical board, which will give him the general nature of the complaint. The physician, he or she, also has an opportunity to come to the field office and review the actual medical records at issue prior to the interview, which preserves their ability to be prepared to come in and answer questions about whatever the given issue is. These interviews generally take about 2 hours per patient, so if you have a 4 or 5 patient overprescribing case, these can go on for more than one day in some cases. One of the challenges in having these interviews is scheduling all these participants on one day or 2 days and having them all meet in one place and talk about a case. DAGs decide whether they're going to appear in person, potentially send questions to the investigator they would like asked, or in rare cases, appear telephonically. And that about sums up the physician interview.
With most cases after the physician interview, a meeting is held with the team, the investigator, the medical consultant, and the deputy, and a decision is made. Usually it involves sending the case to an expert. So the expert review is another important aspect of the entire investigation process, since what that expert opines determines how the case proceeds. Therefore, Determining who the expert will be and what evidence will be provided to the expert is critical. The medical consultant, investigator, and deputy must work closely to identify the appropriate specialty, locate the best expert within that specialty and the scope of practice, then identify the specific information that will be provided and make the appropriate redactions to that material. Currently, the investigator assembles the expert package with a cover letter and the specific materials and the redactions, and provides that package to their supervisor and the deputy for approval. While the expectation is that experts provide an opinion within 30 days and spend only 10 hours of their time to review the case, since many cases now involve multiple patients and multiple issues, experts routinely take more than 30 days and/or more than 10 hours of time. Adding to the delay process is the fact that it is difficult to locate experts in certain specialties, such as pediatric oncology, interventional cardiology, and neurosurgery. And it is extremely difficult to locate experts to conduct mental examinations. Another factor that causes delays in the process is that some experts, unfortunately, do not follow the established guidelines for writing their opinion, which of course results in our having to follow up for clarifications. And since getting the expert opinion is usually the last step in an investigation, it necessitates quick reaction once it arrives.
Ancillary legal work that often occurs during an investigation. There's a number of different legal actions that the AG's office takes during an investigation. These don't apply to every investigation, but they do crop up quite frequently. The first is subpoena enforcement, which we've already discussed. The second is a petition to compel an examination pursuant to Business and Professions Code 820. And this arises when we have a suspicion that a physician may be unsafe to practice due to a mental or physical impairment. When this occurs, the AG's office petitions the medical board for an order compelling an examination. Prior to that happening, the investigator seeks to obtain an agreement or a consent to an examination. And many physicians say, that's fine, I'll come in for an examination, but sometimes we have to go the petition route. And that can sometimes require gathering additional evidence in collaboration with HQIU, subsequent treater records, other records from other physicians that aren't necessarily involved in the original complaint. The next category is interim suspension orders. These are matters that are handled before the Office of Administrative Hearings and are undertaken when there's evidence that a doctor is impaired due to a physical or mental condition, has violated the Medical Practice Act or is about to, and is an imminent danger to the public health, safety, and welfare. The next category are automatic suspension orders, and these are used in very limited cases because they only apply to physicians who are incarcerated in state prison. Court appearances at bail recommendations at criminal hearings. This is the Penal Code Section 23 provision I was discussing earlier, and these are all the ancillary legal work that may occur, and each of them requires collaboration and evidence gathering. Oftentimes, as I said, we have to gather additional medical records. We have to gather declarations from witnesses that may have been involved in the underlying issue. We oftentimes have to obtain arrest reports or other documents in order to proceed with these different interim orders or ancillary legal actions. Now, there's always questions that arise. Why does it take so long to shut down a completely, or someone who we suspect to be unsafe to practice? And the short answer is due process. For example, if we go Penal Code Section 23 and we step into a criminal case, we cannot ask for bail conditions or own recognizance release conditions until there's been an evidentiary showing in the criminal case. That often doesn't occur until the preliminary hearing. But we may find out about the conduct at the arraignment. And sometimes there's a long window between arraignment and preliminary hearing, and we cannot obtain PC-23 relief until we have some evidentiary basis, which occurs generally at the preliminary hearing. So that's one of the reasons that, we can't snap our fingers and have somebody suspended from the practice. The same is true of interim suspension orders. These, the licensees have a vested property right in their license, and with that comes due process rights. And we actually have to make an evidentiary showing in an interim suspension order proceeding, showing that they've either violated the Medical Practice Act or are about to, that they suffer from a mental or physical condition that renders them unsafe to practice, and that they're an imminent threat to public safety. This requires, again, evidence gathering, as I said, and it requires us to pretty much have the case teed up for an accusation at the time we go forward, because the Government Code Section 11529 that governs interim suspension orders requires that when we obtain the order, we have to file the accusation within 30 days. And then we have to provide a hearing within 30 days of filing of a notice of defense. So even if the subject physician uses 15 days to file the notice of defense, we're looking at about a 75-day window to put the whole case on from the date we obtain the interim suspension order. And the reason for that is it's to protect the doctor. If he's on an interim, or he or she is on an interim suspension order, they're entitled to have a actual adjudication of the allegations timely, rather than being left suspended for a year or two. So that's the reason for that, and that is another reason why sometimes the ancillary legal work causes a bit of a delay in the process of an investigation.
Cases that are investigated with clear alleged criminal violations are worked without parallel vertical enforcement, since HQE does not monitor criminal investigations or review search warrants, an investigational component of a criminal case. While a small percentage and number of investigations are ultimately referred for criminal charges, many investigations of licensees do involve the potential for criminal charges as well as administrative charges, and may eventually be transmitted to HQE for administrative action based on the evidence. HQE does monitor unlicensed cases to determine whether a physician is identified for aiding and abetting the unlicensed practice. The investigator and supervisor are responsible for each of the assigned cases in their respective field offices, so are expected not to delay any one case and to treat each case on its own merits based on the standard of care at the time of the events and the available evidence for that case. This is most important when there are more than one case on the same physician, and gets more complicated when there is more than one patient within a single case. In these situations, it is critical that all patients within one case are fully investigated to determine whether there were violations pertaining to each one of those patients. Once the investigator, supervisor, and deputy deem that an investigation is complete, the case is referred to the Medical Board Chief of Enforcement, Ms. Delp, with a recommended disposition from HQIU. That such a recommendation might be to close the case, or to refer that case to the Attorney General for prosecution, or for the Medical Board to issue a citation and fine or a public letter of reprimand. Ms. Delp reviews all cases and works directly with the assigned deputy for a final disposition.
Upon receipt of the email from the HQIU investigator inquiring whether the investigation is complete, the HQE prosecutor evaluates the evidence and determines if it is sufficient to meet the extremely high evidentiary burden of clear and convincing evidence to a reasonable certainty. Within 3 business days, an email goes back to the HQIU investigator concurring that the investigation is complete, or in the alternative, requesting additional investigation. After that reply is received, or when 3 days has elapsed, the supervising investigator has the investigative report signed, then processes the case to file internally, and ships the case discs, the electronic case binders, to the medical board. The last prong speaks to the HQIU setting aside their file until there's a final disposition of the case, and that occurs between HQE and the Chief of Enforcement or the Executive Director herself, and there's a determination made whether the case should transmit for accusation or some other action. And the last slide in our presentation is for the visual learners who prefer flowcharts, and this takes you through an investigation from tip to tail. And it has little diversions if there's subpoena enforcement necessary or that sort of thing. So this is a useful tool for those inclined to rely on flowcharts. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this was enlightening, and if there's any questions.
Thank you. It's very clear. Any question coming from the members?
Thank you very much. I want to pick up right on this last slide, and that is if we were to look at these variations from a case that goes through smoothly, so a time for each of these different types of cases. You talked about the sexual offender cases, quality of care cases, and so on. So if you were to overlay a timeline on this flow map and you said this is the minimum time and this is the maximum time based upon our retrospective analysis, and you were to say you meet weekly, I'm not sure you said weekly, but there are roadblocks that you encounter, I think it would be important for us to understand that. But probably the most important thing, I mean, you said so many important things, but the thing that really stuck is that you're up against these private attorneys that are and that are really defending their client, right? And you mentioned that you're resource scarce. So with all of this, I think that's the key that will remain concerning, because you're not, without the resources, you can't push this through. So, but I appreciate all of the outstanding work that you do, but I think it's a very challenging case. So in closing, I'd just say it would be wonderful to see for each of those different types of issues an overlying map, taking this map and saying what is my timeline for these, and where are those roadblocks?
I don't know if my boss wants to address this one, but it seems like each case is different, and different roadblocks pop up at different times in different cases. So it would be very difficult to kind of come up with a general number for, say, overprescribing cases. Because sometimes we get the records right away. Sometimes we're in a protracted 9-month fight in Superior Court for the records.
So if we were doing performance improvement, those variations are very important to know. And then, of course, maybe those are the things that you would be addressing. So thank you.
And if I may add to Mr. Davis's comments, the vertical enforcement protocol does anticipate that there are markers that we would like to reach, all things being perfect, and caseloads being what they should be. It's 15 to 18 for investigators, and as Mr. Davis mentioned, the DAGs carry about 15 to 20 administrative cases, writs, and appeals, and about 40 investigations at any given time. That is our reality. At the same time, because of the due process, we do take the time needed to make sure we get it right, and that the evidence is of the best quality, so then that way it can stand up in court. It can't just be hearsay, it can't just be innuendo and anonymous complaints. At the same time, the medical board actually has no precedential value on any case that you decide. So therefore, every case stands and dies alone on its merits within the medical records available to it, and within whatever the expert in the same field decides it is. And that is overlaid on top of the standard of care, which it could be varied temporarily or by pioneers and renegades, you name it, and hopefully not incompetence, obviously, because those are the easiest cases where they're incompetent. But they're not all incompetence. They're based on gross negligence. Kathleen, anything to add?
Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
You know, as I sit and listen to this, and believe me, it's more sometimes than I can digest, because it's very intricate. But having said that, if there's the public out there that thinks that the process should run so smoothly and so quickly and so easily, listening to this in a lay type of ears, you know, this puts it in perspective that it is not, done, carelessly. There's lots of people involved. There's lots of checks and balances. And I don't think the public really understands that one is checking up on the other. And it's just not one person that's, saying, the hatchet, or, you get a card freed from jail, like Monopoly or something. So that's my takeaway from this.
And we hope that the additional takeaway is that you have three critical positions involved in this process: the investigator, the medical consultant, and the deputy attorney general, each of which bring their own training, qualifications, and experience to bear in an independent but not a silo. It's a team effort, and we always hope to get it right and to be able to bring you quality cases for you to ultimately opine on and either agree with the stipulation or the judge's order or not. And either way, the public protection being paramount.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments from those in the audience? Any comments from those on the phone?
Yes, we do have a question from Eric Andrus. Your line is open.
I love how you all just ignore the public's comments when you know commenting will only incriminate you. Hopefully you can clear up with two technical points before the main meeting. The sound is terrible. We can hear the callers just fine, but the people in the room sound like they're talking over two tin cans on a string. Dr. Yip's dialect is hard to understand to begin with, let alone having to try to understand him over a bad sound system. Secondly, why does the cameraman keep focusing on the table apron when callers call in? We want to see the board members' reactions, or if they're not paying attention, not the medical board sign. Back to the topic, I strained to hear the gentleman talking over. See, he's focusing in on the sign right now instead of on the board. I strained to hear the gentleman talking about having meetings to figure out ways to make older cases move along quickly. We're seeing cases where that's simply not true. The recent case that we'll be talking about tomorrow took 4 years from the time the accusation was filed and 58 weeks after the accusation was filed to a decision. When they finally announced the decision to the family who had been waiting for 4 years, they did so just days before Christmas, ruining their holiday because they gave a doctor who killed their son a public reprimand instead of a real discipline. This case did not end up at all based on its merits, Ms. Castro. It ended up based on the barter between the doctor and the AG's office. Judge Feinstein commented at a past meeting that if these were criminal cases, they'd be thrown out of court for taking too long. Another case, according to your website, of Dr. Ifiatu Ekelem had an accusation filed in August of 2012 and a second accusation filed in December of 2017. So he has two simultaneous accusations open, the first now being open for 285 weeks. That's nearly 5.5 years. So it would appear you're not doing a very good job to move cases along. As we add more and more cases to our website, we're going to be able to detail these deficiencies more and more. We currently have over 1,200 doctor disciplines in the database covering all of 2016 to the present. And it's easily searchable for any term. No one will have to be charged $1,000 by Kerry Webb to get information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
No further comments.
Okay, moving on, agenda item 7, future agenda items. Any members of agenda items for the next enforcement committee meetings? Are there any public comments from those in the audience on future agenda items? Are there any comments from those on the phone for future agenda items?
Yes, we do have a question from the phone. Susan Lauren, go ahead.
Hi. I request that the license of the surgeon who mutilated me be revoked in the interest of public safety. Last October, Dev Ganadev told me someone in enforcement would contact me, but I only got a call yesterday, perhaps because I contacted legislators who are watching my case with concern. Recall, I was medically recommended to breast reduction as a solution for pain. I didn't go to surgery for weight loss. I was healthy and muscular and worked out daily. My waist was size 2, hips size 6, and breasts 32G. Doing lipo was wrong patient selection. Surgery is not one size fits all.
Ma'am, this sounds like a pending complaint. This sounds like a pending complaint that may come before the board members.
3 minutes, correct? You've interrupted my 3 minutes. I'd like to start over.
You cannot talk about a pending complaint.
I didn't consent to what was done. The board-certified plastic surgeon referred to me by my PCP, destroyed my breast, and used power-assisted liposuction, a dangerous
Ma'am, the board has to base their decisions on the evidence that comes before them. Just like if you were doing a jury trial, you wouldn't contact individual decision makers. And so it has to be based on the evidence that comes before them and not on comments that come to a board meeting.
She's just talking.
Is it still on?
No, it's on here. Ma'am, excuse me.
Well, I think they can contact the office directly though, okay? So any other comments on the phone for future agenda items?
Yeah.
No? Okay, great. We now move on to agenda item 9, adjournment. Would like to call a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Thank you. And the time is, we overpassed
3:25.
3:25 p.m. Thank you.